Welcome back to Under the Stack. This is a series where we go beneath the surface of in-store technology to understand what's really shaping the future of retail and payments. Today, we're tackling a problem that most large retailers feel every single day, the Frankenstack. It's what happens when organisations chase best-of-breed technology without stepping back to think about how those systems actually work together. Over time, bolt-on after bolt-on, retailers come up with a technology estate that's heavy, fragile, and deeply fragmented, held together by integrations and workarounds. The irony? That shiny best-of-breed solution that promised transformation often ends up delivering only a fraction of its potential once it's forced to live inside of a broken stack. To unpack this topic, we're joined by Leni, a product leader at New Black, and Victor, the CRO at Aevi. This is the Frankenstack.
What I've seen, and historically, and now maybe coming from the side of payments, that historically customers used to choose end-to-end solution rather than best of breed. And as a result, that became more of customers fitting into wider roadmap rather than having a specific roadmap that would then fit into the wider strategy. And whenever people wanted to implement any changes, then maybe some changes were implemented, but they were more of putting plaster or sticking plaster on a problem rather than overhaul big changes, wholesale changes. And I guess in all of this is this return on investment. People lack courage to say, actually, we're probably now wasting more money trying to make it work rather than saying how we can design our current setup with the future in mind. And there's very few or very little companies that kind of think, okay, what do I need that will work for me 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line rather than for the next 12 months. I guess in all of this also, I have to acknowledge that especially in payments, the speed of change has increased so much. I've seen more change in payments over the last probably 2 years than in 10, 15 years leading up to that point, which all of a sudden makes things more difficult to fit in the new narrative, right? So people need to be more agile, have more courage to say, actually, we've reached a point where it doesn't work anymore, that is clunky, that is just about keeping it together, and then having the courage to say, actually, let's start from scratch and have something that is more modular, that it could be more of a program rather than individual project.
Hey, Leni, what do you see? You folks at New Black actually coined this phrase, the Frankenstack. And as soon as you hear it, you understand straight away what it means. You can almost visualize it from a retailer's perspective. What are your thoughts on when retailers are building in new technology into their stack? What are they typically getting wrong?
Well, I think that so the Frankenstack, you said it's visually very appealing. We also have a very good image that we always take along with the word. It's actually Frankenstein, but with all bolts and cables and connections and things like that. And that's actually how we see the architecture of many retailers, that there are so many connections that things get heavyweight just by doing that. And then when there is a new system to come, so they have to choose something like, let's take loyalty as an example, so a new loyalty engine, and you go for best of breed, you choose the best one out there. And the moment that you need to create your first integration, you lose 10% of your functionality of that best of breed tool. And then you create your second integration and the third, fourth, fifth, etc. If you wire it down to the middleware, and your middleware will create all of those integrations. And then by the end, when you're done and you've put it into that Frankenstack, it is nothing more than that. It's just another part in that major Frankenstack that can't live up to its full potential, because through all those integrations, you have lost so much of it already. And I think that is something that we don't see taken into account in the decision-making processes at the moment, is that we look at that individual product and we see this is amazing, this can solve everything. But can it really solve your storefront problems? Can it really move online? Can it really do everything that it promises to do when you put it as another wire or cable or bolt onto that And that's where you see, I think, loads of the frustration momentarily within retail is that they think that they found a solution. And then by the end of the 2-year implementation project, they have nothing to show for, basically. So I do think that is one of the things that's very frustrating for retail at the moment.
Is it down, a lot of this down to some of the questions that buyers are asking internally, like you talked there about? And I think sometimes it's down to they trust vendors, presumably, for the best of breed solutions that you discussed there. Do they go deep enough with vendors to really understand how technology kind of aligns with what they already have in store, do you think? Or is they just not going deep enough down that rabbit hole?
I don't think that they go deep enough indeed. Also, it's not in the best interest of a best of breed supplier to move them in that direction, right? So maybe it's also a bit about that. It always sounds very easy when you start talking about integrations. There are always standards and there are always protocols, and there's so much that you can do. But when you get down into it, then it's harder than it seems. Also, I think that a lot of the projects actually die on that hill, because they try to move it into that enormous tech stack already, and then it's just not worth the effort.
I think you made some very good points there, Leni. I think what I've also seen, and I would like to get Leni's perspective on this, is how often do you guys get asked about the future proofing of the solution? What I tend to see is people, when you've got RFI, RFP situation, people ask for what they currently have, maybe with a little improvement, but very rarely people ask for the roadmap for the future. What have you got 5 years down the line, or what do you envisage is going to happen in a decade? What do you see from your perspective?
I agree. I think there is our experience as well, but I also think that, so we are a unified commerce platform from the ground up, right? So that's one of our key selling points. On the other hand, it's also that our tech stack is interchangeable. And I think that already is so much further away from what retail is used to that they get completely overthrown by it, basically. If we try to explain, okay, we can replace our search engine instantly without touching anything noticeable, or name any of our other core components, that's already so far away from what they're used to. Of course, retail is used to updates that will take ages, running 21 versions over the globe, and having to prove all those 21 versions. That's what they're used to. So I do think that we get asked about roadmap when we're a little bit further along in the project phase or the RFP. It does feel sometimes like a standardized question, not necessarily something that actually grounds the decision. So I do think that I agree with you. Also, my experience from NRF and being there and giving our demos again, I also think that the questions that were asked to me this year were the same questions that were asked to me when I was there 7 years ago for the first time, right? There are still the same problems in retail. They're still trying to solve most of what we see as hygiene factors. They're still trying to solve that.
What's the question that you get fairly consistently?
Stock, always stock. Huge problem still. And it's where we started with, right? So when we started back 10 years ago, we said the only way when you can do real unified commerce is by unifying your stock. It was one of the first principles that we wanted to push out there. And it's still an item. If you can't get your stock levels to be correct in your stores, you can't put them online, then you can't offer click and collect, which is, at the moment, it's a commodity. Consumers expect you to do that, right? 5 years ago, we might have been able to say to each other, oh yeah, that's consumers would like for you to have that, or that would be actually an added value for a consumer to choose your brand. At the moment, we're way past that. Consumers expect you to offer those functionalities, but that's just click and collect, right? So on the other hand, you also have ship from store, which will help you clean up your redundant stock. And also there we see huge opportunities just in cost efficiency, etc. But yeah, it's still one of the questions that was asked most last NRF again.
It's very interesting. So Victor and I actually had this conversation on Friday when we were imagining the future of retail and wondering why, from a payments perspective, we can't walk into a retailer and see when your size isn't on the shelf, see a little QR code that you can scan and check the stock levels in the back, or maybe just order it directly from the shop floor. Is that simply down to the unification of systems that you discussed there, as in retailers just do not have systems talking to each other at the front and back end of the store?
Absolutely. Silos is still a thing. So the website, the commerce vector, there isn't intertwined with the retail store applications. Still not for many of the retailers. And of course you have retailers that have gone through it, or the ones that just started and they start unified from the ground up. But yeah, that's basically it. They just can't see each other's stock levels. Or there is also a part of finance. What if you would allow for this? How would finance deal with orders placed in the store, paid in the store, shipped to home from a warehouse that normally functions as the warehouse for website? There's a lot going on there. And everything can be solved. We have done it over and over again. But yeah, that's the reason that it's not unified. The approach isn't unified.
Leni, I've got a follow-up question, because you mentioned something interesting, that you're talking about the same stuff now that you did 7 years ago. And so why do you think that change that you guys solve for doesn't happen? Who usually pushes back hardest when this change is proposed?
I think that it's various. It's finance. We always see that as something which well, at least strains the conversation a little bit, makes it slower a little bit. It's the ERP, because everything needs to be correct in the ERP, of course. And we always try to say, okay, it's very important that your finances are correct, but they can't be more important than actually making the cash flow. So that's one of the things that we try to accomplish. I think that it's something that I think you said in the beginning, Nathan. It's also somebody needs to take point. And who will take point if you work in silos? So if your organizational structure is still silos, then who will take point to decide, okay, but this is going to be unified. We're all going to work together on this. So it's also change management. I think that there are multiple factors that we can't overlook. And then let's be fair about it. It might also seem as a very daunting project to replace your backend for a unified commerce system. I don't think that it necessarily has to be the moment that you have good change management and an organizational structure that supports it.
Do you think, Victor, from your experience as well, do you think there are almost too many conflicting internal stakeholders trying to wrestle with these changes? So Leni mentioned there, finance are often a blocker. Listen, tell me I'm wrong on this, but I'm assuming not many finance teams are looking at this from a consumer lens in store. And then you've also got obviously operations and retail directors and all these different people in the mix. Do you think that's almost causes the friction in terms of not having or having too many stakeholders internally making these decisions?
Well, let's face it, these days, any decisions are made by multiple members, multiple teams. Everyone is risk averse. Everyone is trying to go for a certain level of due diligence. What Leni has really nailed for me was the lack of unification and lack of understanding how these changes influence different areas. Because if any deal is being reviewed by, let's say, finance department, naturally they will look at the return on investment. So they will look is what's the capex, what's the opex, is it worthwhile? We've got a system that works. We don't have to invest $500,000. Why are we doing it? So if they look only through this lens, then I absolutely agree. Why should you be doing it, right? But then to a marketing team or operations team and say, we need to do this because that will help us with unifying our payment stack or our stock. We will not operate in silos. Then you've got somebody that is responsible for customer success, customer satisfaction. You know, if you don't offer things like click and collect or unified commerce, again, that will have an effect on customer satisfaction. Unless people understand all of these objectives, then they will be looking at this through only lens of their own department. And if you go to IT and say, listen, we need to rip out the system and put a new system in place, guess what? They will have the guards up and say, oh, more project. That means more work for me. I don't want to do it.
with the same resources most of the times, right? Because what you're saying is actually correct. I also see that retail is not in the business of tech. We shouldn't forget that it's not their core business. Their core business is their brand and their product, and they are very good at that. I always try to tell myself, like, we sell software. This is where we are super good at. Our entire organization is focused on software. We are very techy, which we should be. We call ourselves nerds, and I think everybody in New Black is a nerd. But retailers, they are focused on building that momentum for, let's take a shower foam as an example, and then build a brand around that. So I also think that we should be clear on that it's not top of their agenda to replace their tech stack just because it's outdated. It has to be completely obvious that they need to replace their tech stack in order to sell that shower foam in the best consumer experience possible. Maybe also that's where we as providers can maybe improve a little bit.
It's a very good point there, Leni. And, where we see the least amount of resistance when people come to us is when, let's say, the hardware there's a clear sunset date. So they are forced to do it. Or whether there's legislation change.
Yes.
And all of a sudden you need to change something, overhaul this. Or let's say you're going into different regions or maybe different use cases. And all of a sudden you can say, oh, actually, is there a better way of doing it?
Yeah.
But when it comes to establish a state, and I remember once when in my previous life, I was speaking to an airline and they built the software we're selling at that time. They built it themselves and they invested around 2.5 million euros to build it. And it was, by the time they built it, it was out of date. It wasn't fit for purpose. But I remember speaking to a CFO, and the CFO said to me, she was a sponsor of the project. I said, if I now were to bring an external provider that could do what we are doing or even better, for the fraction of the cost that we spend, my head will be on a block. We need to see the ROI, the return on investment of it. And I get it from a personal perspective, right?
Yes.
But as a business, we need to see the ROI of it. I feel sometimes it's a kind of a short-term view, rather than saying, actually, we might need to invest a little bit more. We might not get the full ROI, but as a result, we'll gain 10% of market share, or our returns will minimize, or our payment system will improve, etc. And I guess, again, sometimes where we maybe not struggle, but what we try to do is find somebody who will evangelize the change and be the one that is really helping to drive and try to unify all the silos together.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you mentioned compliance, because it's where we see that is actually taking flight. The European law and legislation with regards to compliance is very daunting, especially for the American brands, and with everything with GDPR, but also the compliance, the tax compliance, etc. Every European Union country has its own rules. It makes it very complicated. And then indeed that maybe change comes from a position of being scared or overwhelmed, which is actually quite a good driver. And so also that is very interesting. And I think that when, I must be honest, when Stephen, our CEO, said way back, okay, we're going to invest in global compliance, I wasn't keen on it at all. But it has been a very good decision, because you do see that it's actually very important and a very big driver for change within retail.
What are the top 3 things that you consistently hear about, Leni, as to why retailers wouldn't adopt technology that you simply know is going to help them?
Wouldn't? Money? Top one. Yeah, there's struggle. And then it takes a very strong leader to look that far ahead, that it will actually help, maybe not immediately, not today, but absolutely very soon. So I think that money is one. Money is in terms of what can the retailer allocate to a new software project. And then the second is also money. But then more on the personal aspect, what you said, Victor, I see that when you go unified, that a lot of questions are actually about whose budget will this allocate to? And so if the sale is made, and who can claim for the sale? That's also an interesting one, right? So if the sale is made online, will that account to e-com? Or because retail is the one executing it, will it account to retail? And if it's not retail, why would they actually pack the goods? That's also an interesting one. Maybe not the strongest one, but it was one interesting to mention. And so it's money and leadership. Absolutely. So also leadership, you really need that leadership. And I also do think what I said before, it's the silo. So it's just the fact that we don't move across those silos, that retail doesn't really communicate with e-com because they have been separate for their entire existence. Let's go way back in history of retail. We had those brick and mortar stores, and then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but then e-com came along, and e-com came along like a sort of pilot. Let's see if this works. Let's see if it actually, will it do something? And then they got bigger and more important, of course. So they became more important. No way they're going to hand that back to retail. Nor retail is not losing the fight. They're not going to hand it back to e-com, for example. So yeah, I still think that making a decision to become unified means that those silos need to change their ways. And only then you can talk about consumer experience. Because for me, a consumer nowadays, they actually don't care about your internal struggles or your internal silos or whatever. If they order something online, they want to bring it back in the store and they don't care what you do with it or if you can solve that or not. They just want their money back in their bank accounts and they actually want it to be seamless. And the other way around, it's not much discussed, but vice versa, the same. Consumers don't care about the fact that you don't have your loyalty program unified. They want their points to be accredited instantly. I was talking to a group of retailers a few months ago, and I said, can you give me one loyalty program that doesn't hold the disclaimer, points will be accredited within 24 hours? Why do you need 24 hours? You have an order, it made value. Probably there is a rule against it. The reason why it's like that, it's because it's not unified. So I think that, and consumers, they don't care about that. They don't care about your internal struggles, basically. Nor should they. Let's be fair, nor should they.
So amazing points, especially agree with the top two, money and money. I guess where maybe I've mentioned it very briefly before is that I see the aversion to risk increasing. And I think today with the news cycles of things going wrong and then all of a sudden retailers being in the front pages of any publications, people are more cautious and taking more time and don't want to take as many risks as they did before. This is famous adage in the past, nobody ever lost a job for choosing IBM. I think that's still probably more relevant or more relevant now than it used to be in the past.
Agree, yeah.
And these decisions, again, sometimes to be a pioneer, you have to have a little bit more courage. You have to take a little bit more risk, and then you could do things well. And that is, if there is a compelling event, then maybe that's easy to justify.
Yes.
But when things are just okay, then it's probably harder to say, actually, let's overhaul this one.
Yeah.
I really loved your point about the silo thinking, and I've seen it everywhere, in even internally in some of the businesses I've worked in the past, where people look at their individual objectives or department objectives and they don't roll into the larger objective. Because for me, whether order is fulfilled by in-store or e-commerce doesn't really matter. Ultimately, that leads to revenue, that leads to growth. And if people don't realize that we should be just trying to service our customer as well as we can, because customer doesn't care whether it's e-com, whether it's in-store, they just want it now, they want it quickly. And for them, why should they be involved in this internal battles and back and forth? So yeah, that was, I think that really resonates.
I also think that you made an interesting point with regards to risk. And if we take that back to compliance, you actually see why that is such a big driver for change. Because the risk of being non-compliant is bigger than the risk of not making the move into the change. Because being non-compliant, that's awful. Then you have a very big issue. So I completely agree with you. That is actually something that you see happening a lot, that there is risk in making the decision. So better not make the decision at all. But then when you see that not making the decision to change becomes more risky, then you see that there is a driver for change. Yeah, I completely agree with that viewpoint.
We talk more about risk. What's the risk of not making these changes beyond compliance that you both see in the market today?
Well, I just think, and all latest reports show that what we have put off as add-ons, the unified commerce principles that we have put off as add-ons, as options, something that you could do in order to increase consumer experience, but not as a necessity, not as a commodity, that's gone. I really think that the consumer from nowadays, they don't make the decisions anymore on the basics. They differentiate on the unified commerce principles. How fast can I get this? When can I get it? How can I get it? That's only about stock, right? But that's a differentiator now. Even for myself, when I'm browsing, we have a fully packed life. I need to be able to influence when I receive a parcel, how I receive a parcel, and where I receive my parcel. So if you can't utilize all your stock, and if you can't utilize the unified commerce principles like click and collect, ship from store, etc., you will miss out. And I think that's the same for loyalty. Although loyalty, of course, we see that a very good loyalty program is unified from the ground up. Otherwise, it just doesn't work well. But I just feel that most of the retailers don't realize that they're working margin now. You know, we are in a very different situation than 50 years ago, when there wasn't such a huge amount of brands to compare between. And now we have everything. And I think that's something where it shouldn't matter that the differentiators have changed. And I'm not sure if everybody sees it like that already, but the consumers see it like that. So what's the risk? The risk is missing out.
I think from my point of view, Nathan, I think the biggest risk is loss of revenue. And ultimately, that's where it will go down to, right? I think we are past beyond the times, especially the newer generation, that people buy something because of brand. Some people are quite loyal and they'll buy, I don't know, clothing, makeup, maybe cars. But the differences between individual brands are now diminishing. It's easier probably to copy. It's easy to catch up with certain things. Where in the past, you've seen people, and we talked about it on one of the other podcasts about the fuel. Why do you fuel a certain petrol station versus the other ones? And if you look at this as a kind of commodity, then what's the difference? You probably price, right? Or how quickly you could get this in your hands. I guess in the past, people would be saying, oh, no, I'll be loyal to this stock because I've shopped there my whole life, never been disappointed. But now, our generation, newer generation, people just want whatever criteria they're using at that point. It might be either price. Somebody says, listen, I just want this very cheaply, right? I want to buy it super, super cheap, or I want it very quickly. Or when I purchase something, I would like to have a little bit of a better customer experience. If you go to a certain stores, you don't expect a great customer experience, but then you would know that, okay, that might be, the product might not last for so long, but you're going to buy it cheaper. So I think failing to adapt in all of this, it will only makes it easier to push your customers towards other options that are super easily available. And now today with the mobile phone technology, how difficult is it to look for something else? You could use, I don't know, ChatGPT and say, please find me 10 different brands. And all of a sudden you have everything listed and put in a nice place for you. That's the ultimate risk. And we could talk about things that fall underneath in payments, for example. If you're non-compliant, you could be fined. If your hardware is beyond its usability, then there might not be service, there might be loss of service, etc. Ultimately, all this leads to the revenue.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that it really touches upon a generational impact in loyalty, etc. Absolutely. But your last sentence actually triggered something when you said, okay, indeed, if you're non-compliant, and yes, that could lead to fines. I think what is even more important is that it also leads to loss of trust. And I think we are moving into an era where trust is the greatest guide that you have, because there's so little that we can trust. There's so little that we see or experience online that we can trust from the get-go, meaning that people will be very keen to look at something that they trust. And if it's just the inch of being untrustworthy or fake or whatever, you will lose them instantly, because we will develop a sixth sense for that. So it's something that you triggered. I was thinking, yeah, trust is going to be super important as well in what you can do, and that you can trust the process to work out for you. So if you say that it will be there in 2 days, please make sure that it does, right? Please make sure that the consumer can trust the entire process, from indeed payments, from being compliant, from being GDPR approved, but also in the promises that you have made, the promise to deliver, and etc., that the consumer can trust you as a brand.
We had this interesting conversation last week from a colleague who was talking about how he fuels up his car regularly at a certain forecourt, doesn't have a loyalty program, they never recognize him, he goes every week, fuels up, disappears, comes back and never receives any loyalty schemes to join or any question to join it. What opportunity are retailers missing with loyalty programs today?
Yes, okay. I do have to point out that I think that loyalty is just one of the elements that needs to be done in terms of brand communities, because that's the higher goal of things. I think that if you want to make a move into loyalty, you first have to look at the generations. It's crucial to understand generational differences when it comes to loyalty. You just mentioned it, Victor, and you said we used to shop because we always shop there. That's a boomer expression. The boomer generation did that because they were taught to be loyal to something that you know, because you've always been there. And then I think that we see a huge decline. So it starts with the Gen X, the forgotten generation. Very interesting generation though, but they got lured in by transparency and being authentic. Cost and price became an issue. Okay, so they don't want to be overcharged. Then you got the millennials, who are an experience-minded generation. So the millennials are very fully booked. They have a very full life because it's the groundbreaking generation where you have kids and partners and jobs and sports and everything at the same time. So what they do and what they choose needs to be experience-minded with the small amount of time that they have. Then you have Gen Z. They're not loyal at all because they weren't taught how to. And also they don't see why, because they have the entirety of the world's brands at their disposal. They grew up with that, so they can choose whatever they want continuously, just whatever they feel like that day or whatever their peers say that they should choose for. So if you want loyalty to zoom into all of that, you need a loyalty program that focuses on those various experience-minded, cost-efficient, etc. generations. I think that maybe that's why retailers, they try loyalty, but it fails because they zoom into one of those elements too much. And then we haven't even started on cultural differences yet. So I can imagine that it's daunting, but there is a ton of research done on the topics. And a good loyalty program keeps people coming back. So I always say the holy grail of a loyalty program is not that somebody says, I need this. Where shall I buy it? I'll do it here because they give me points, rewards, badges, I don't know what. That's all. The holy grail of a loyalty program is that somebody starts thinking, ooh, I would like to have that next badge, that next reward, that next recognition. What shall I buy in order to get there? And I think that it's possible. I'm absolutely convinced that's possible, so that you actually, through a good loyalty engine, drive sales. And it's not from the demand is already there, but that you actually create the demand. I'm absolutely convinced that that's possible.
You said something early in there around community linking with loyalty program. What I took from that was loyalty programs almost becoming a precursor to building a brand community.
Yes.
Is that right? Is that how you see this developing?
I think that a loyalty engine is a driver for brand community building because it can drive segmentation, first of all, between, we always say, diehard fans and locally invested consumers. It can also differentiate if you, for example, introduce badges, something that we talk about that lately a lot, because badges can drive multiple motivations, and it can also zoom into the values of your brand community is a bit better. So you could say, okay, if your community is environmental aware, you could do something with that, etc. But it can also reinforce it. So you could say from a certain tier or level onwards, you get access to a certain event or a certain club that you can participate in. And participating in that club can actually lead back to points or different ways of counting contribution in that loyalty engine. So it reinforces it, it drives it, it makes it visually appealing, it makes it more practical to follow. So I do think that it's a sort of a backbone. It's a backbone for brand community building. So there's much more to it, but it serves as a backbone.
I really like and you put it very elegantly, Leni, in terms of what loyalty means to different people. When you were just saying it, for me, just clicked that every single loyalty program that I was part of is just a standard program. And there's no consideration to my age, to where I am and what I want. At no point, any of the loyalty programs I'm part of, anyone asked me whether I would like to get points, get vouchers, discount, or do I want to convert this into a special events or badges or anything. And I think that's the whole element of it.
Yeah. And also, do you feel recognized?
No, absolutely not.
No, exactly. So it actually has the tendency of becoming very cheap.
Yeah.
Whereas it does cost money for the retailer to invest in a loyalty program. And most of the loyalty programs have the tendency to become quite cheap, to be experienced as quite cheap because, okay, does it really motivate you because you get a few extra points?
Yeah.
Is the end result something that you actually wanted? You don't feel recognized through it.
We had this conversation last week, Nathan and I. We're rumbling on about trying to improve the payments experience. And these days you go to a retailer, and I think, Nathan, you gave the example of buying something for your father-in-law, and there was no recognition, acknowledgement of what you've purchased for that retailer before. And wouldn't it be great if, let's say, you go to a point of sale and you speak to somebody at the other side of a counter and say, "Oh, hi, Nathan, you purchased these trousers before. Is it a great fit, or did you find them good? Or we noticed that you spent so much money with us in the last 3 months. Actually, as a one-off, there is a 10% discount. Or you could convert it into a special event, ticket for a special event."
Yeah.
All of a sudden, it goes back to being recognized, being seen, and using loyalty for the right reasons, rather than just saying, "Oh, we've got 10 points at some point. We could convert something," or not having any loyalty points and actually not recognizing your customer. And we spoke to one of the big retailers recently, and they said that margins are so low, they actually make more money from selling some of the data from some of the product they sell.
That's crazy.
So having a loyalty that actually provides this engine could be worst case, let alone about caring about your customer. It could be something that could be used as a monetization engine for the future.
Yeah, but moving back to, I do think, so I completely agree on the consumer side, indeed. Okay, so it's recognition, it's about getting acknowledged for for your loyalty, for being there before, etc. So that's all very important. On the other hand, looking from the retailer perspective, what do we want? We want recurring purchases and up and cross-selling. If I look from the perspective of up and cross-selling, what works is you are at the till system, and this purchase will bring you 15 additional points, which is nice, right? If you would instantly see that it just takes you 10 more points to become the next level, and you would immediately see what that would unlock for you, how inclined would you be to make that additional 10 pound, 10 euro investment? You would be super inclined, because you get teased by it already. There is something in your future that you actually want because it's close. And you think that so many retailers lack the opportunity, the infrastructure, the system to actually do that, to do that pre-calculation and that teasing and showing what lies ahead. And yeah, it's such a missed opportunity in that case as well. And then you move into the direction of, what can I buy in order to make that next step, which is amazing. But then, of course, it has to be indulging. It has to be nice what you will offer as that next step. And I think that also their rewards need to be very tuned towards your consumer. There have to be monetary rewards, but also non-monetary rewards. Those are always forgotten. I see so little retailers actually implementing non-monetary rewards like recognition, access to badges, so new ways of collecting points, putting that gamification principle back into the loyalty engine. But participation in events, access to a club or an online, I don't know what, something that feels untangible but nice. Yeah.
I always look at the initial, and for me, in the UK especially, the first loyalty program that really caught fire was the Tesco Club Card, right? So as soon as a Club Card came out, you could scan it at the till and you got points. I don't think, and I might be wrong, maybe I don't pay enough attention to it, but I don't think that concept has evolved enough over the last decade. And then when I see, especially the evolution of things like brands like HelloFresh and Gusto who offer meal packs, it blows my mind that a brand like Tesco or Asda or Morrison's or insert major supermarket here do not own that meal pack market, because they can see exactly what consumers have bought food-wise for the last X amount of years if they've got their Club Card access, and they should be using that data to then help consumers make those kind of meal pack decisions, for example, in store or at checkout. And it feels to me like Club Card especially has just become more of a, how do we get people's data to feed them offers that we think they bought this week, they're probably going to buy it again, as opposed to actually enhance the service or enhance the product for the consumer. Is that fair or is that wrong?
Well, I'm thinking actually Tesco indeed was one of the groundbreaking loyalty engines in the world. There's so much written about the Tesco loyalty program, whereas it is quite basic. So it's a quite basic loyalty program. I don't think that it wouldn't apply as well in other retail industries, as in supermarkets, groceries, which is basically a commodity. You have to do it anyways. So I do think that for them, it was a differentiator. I don't think that it would apply as well everywhere else. With regards to your meal plan, I think that it also depends on, so they have the data, which is amazing, and they have a lot. And I think, Victor, I agree with you that data is key. We have said it for 15 years already. We all sit on tons of data. What do we do with it? I still think that is the case. So big data came up when I started my career. And I still think that we have the same question. What shall we do with it? And then you have those few parties who actually know what to do with it, and they buy it from you. And then maybe, Nathan, that comes into your perspective, is that maybe retail still doesn't know what to do with their data very well. So making bold decisions to actually step into some other adventure, like those meal plan solutions. Absolutely, yeah. It's an interesting take on the matter.
What I'm the most excited about the Tesco Club Card is when I scan myself scanning and it says, "Hello, Victor, welcome again." That's the highlight for me for the loyalty program.
Yeah, for me, and it's a bit much, but something that I keep on saying to every retailer that we talk to is that, what are you going to do with subscriptions this year? Because I just want my life to be easier.
Yeah.
And I think that if you have all this data, you could actually track recurring purchases so easy. And if you would combine that, like a Tesco, you would combine that into a subscription. You could say, "Hi, Leni, you buy this every single week." Yes, I have kids. We have this stuff every single week. If somebody would take that out of my hands and just give me a subscription with what I need in a recurring pattern based on analysis, on actual analysis, and now with AI, I think that it can even be better. And maybe I just need to proofread it. I would go for a subscription like that instantly. It will make my life so much easier. And then maybe I want to change my meals, absolutely, now and then. But there are those recurring patterns. And this is just, now we're talking about groceries. Skincare. It's a no-brainer. If you use skincare, you use it in a rhythm. And that rhythm will stay the same forever. It's something that you need. So for me, I think, and maybe this is again more towards generational impact, but millennials, they will always choose for the things that make their life easier. If there isn't an experience involved in it, I want to put that aside, because in purchases there is also experiences. But if there isn't an experience involved, Let's make a subscription out of it, because we just want to have it done. We want to strike it off the to-do list.
That episode really exposes the uncomfortable truth behind modern payment retail technology. Fragmentation isn't just a technical problem, it's typically an organizational one, and over the next few episodes we're going to be going further down that rabbit hole and showing you some of the tactics that you can execute to solve these problems, from siloed teams, risk-averse decision-making, loyalty programs that don't recognize customers, and stacks that can't evolve fast enough. A huge thank you to Leni from New Black for talking through the Frankenstack. In the next episode of Under the Stack, we're going to go deeper. Unified commerce, loyalty, compliance, risk, and what practical changes actually look like for retailers trying to modernize without ripping everything out. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.